Hello, we are here at the pavilion deck viewing the flat garden. I'll be talking about pines today. There are a number of pines here, mugo pines and shore pines that are from the region, and black pines we find in Japan. It is a collaborative work of a scenery made from a diverse origin. What comes into our eyes are pines that are well established in form as opposed to more naturally pruned. Especially when what I've experienced in places with good established pine trees, like at Nijo Castle, they are very well trained pine trees. I feel from the scenery that we see discipline in the form and in the trained pine trees. Imagine yourself sitting in the showing inside the building and having a tiger screen behind you, and then in front you have a big panorama of well-established pine trees. These pine trees that have been maintained for decades and decades. You feel so much power the owner had, and I think that's all included. It gives you the feel, the power of what pine trees have. Our view of pine have rounder shelves, a little softer and a warm feel. It is derived from the shore pines of its character. The black pines lean towards this character of the shore pine and is made a little bit rounder than what I have talked about in the Nijo Castle. Of our pines is more yasashi, a kind and a peaceful look. It is interesting to see how the presentation of a different touch on these trees can create a different feel.
I think today we will talk about pine trees, and pine trees in particular in this particular gardens. There's a few species within the pine trees I'd like to introduce you. So basically the pine trees in general, what you need to know is if you look at how many needle, there's 2 needle pines and 3 needle pines and 5. So 5 needle is basically the white pines, or the Japanese or Western or Eastern white pines. So typically in sort of Japanese style gardens, we use the 2 needle pine. Let me show you some of the two needles, and if you can straight looking at that's a black pine next to the stone lantern, Japanese black pine. Again, that's a two needle pine. And if you pan a little bit, see to the right of the black pine, you can see the needles are a little shorter and tighter. Actually, this is a northwest native shore pine, Pinus contorta. And because both black pine and shore pine is both two needle pine, they grow and they show the very similar habit. So when we do maintain, we'll do pretty much kind of same maintenance method. Basically, in the summer, springtime, we do what we call candling, the new growth, and then we take the candle. And now, this time of the year, it's early December, we'll start actually taking the old needles out, which I'll show you a little bit later. So beside this black pine and shore pine, and of course other two needle pines are Scotch pine, for example. And also there's a Japanese red pine, which is rare, but actually Japanese red pine looks and grows and behave like a Scotch pine. So you might see the red bark pines. It could be a Scotch pine or a Japanese red pine. Please take a look at this. This is a Japanese black pine. But here's what we're trying to do is we are basically making the hedge out of black pine, which is probably you haven't seen in many places, but actually it's common. This is a very traditional techniques. We use actually pine as a hedge. It can be this low. We are trying to get this one up to probably 4 feet. Some instances for the northern part of Japan, they use windbreakers. In that case, pine trees are this big and probably 30, 40 feet. And still they maintain as a hedge-like shape. So again, just I want to share with you that the pine trees can be uniquely actually shaped and formed as a hedge. So you should try that. Now we are a little bit actually behind the flat gardens. I just want to show you the basically two distinct yet very closely related pine trees. One right behind is Scotch pine. if you can zoom in a little bit, so it's pretty tight and has a little bit of actually bluish tint to the needle. So it's a bluish green, and that's typical in the Scotch pine. And Scotch pine, again, it's a two-needle pine and fairly dense, short needle, relatively speaking. And then to your left is, this is actually Japanese red pines. So you can see they are very look-alike, especially the bark. They show the sort of exfoliating loose red on the barks. So these are Japanese and Scotch pine. But in most cases, what you see is it's hard to find the pure species. For instance, the black pine or red pine. They actually easily crossbreed. So actually, more than 80% of the pine trees in Japan, basically in mountain or native setting, are basically crossbreeding, something between the black pine and red pine. So it's very actually hard to find pure the red or black, and oftentimes you can find those only in the nursery. Another thing I need to mention is traditionally in Japanese garden tradition, we basically distinguish black pine and red pine, not just the shape and forms that they use. So the black pine being oftentimes called male, strong, masculine, short, green, very stiff, tight needle. Whereas the red pine is more like a feminine like quality. Very soft, branches are long, and the needles are slender, and a little lighter green actually, almost like a bluish green. And the bark, the tree trunk is again, as the namesake, it's red and the black. So black, and another thing is the black is basically coastal. Basically, black pine grows along the coast of Japan, and then red pine is basically up high in altitude in the mountains. So those are the typical sort of distinction. If you go to Japan, a native landscape, in the mountain, very soft, greenish, and that's red pines. And on the coast, it's basically black pine. Black pine can take the salt and can tolerate the salt water in the ground and